everyone, and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be a planning vlog of sorts because there's a lot I want to get done in November and December, and I have a lot of fabric in front of me. So I need to sit down and figure out what I'm actually going to be making over the next couple of months, and I thought it'd be fun to share that process with all of you. Now, I did a video similar to this at the beginning of October, but that was a little bit more planned out. I think I started with a list of things that I want to potentially make, and then I just sketched them for you. Whereas today I have no list, I just have a pile of fabric that I would like to use up, and now I need to figure out what things I would make out of it to do that. So it's going to be a little bit less structured and a little bit more raw, and you're going to see me be a little bit more overwhelmed because, as I said, it's a very large pile of fabric that I'm sitting in front of. This isn't what I planned on posting today, but I hope it is enjoyable regardless. I wanted to film a weekly vlog this week because I've actually gotten quite a bit done this week, but it's been a very stressful week just family-wise, and I ended up complaining a lot, and I didn't really want to post a second vlog so soon after the last weekly vlog where I was also complaining a lot. So I thought I could do something kind of light and a little bit more fun today, and it's definitely gonna be fun for me, so I hope it's fun for you to watch. So as I said, this video is going to be a little bit less structured than the first one of these I did. So I'm going to start by taking a notebook and taking a pen and writing out a list of things that I want to potentially make. And then I'm going to narrow that down and fine-tune the ideas a little bit with sketches. But before making a new list, I want to actually talk about the things that I wanted to make in October and actually tell you what I accomplished. So some of these were mentioned in that October plans video and some of them weren't. So on this list, I have 1940s pants plus 1920s pants. So the 1940s pants were for the Sewing Through the Decades project, and I finished those, and I actually made them again out of a different fabric. So I definitely overachieved on that one. 1920s pants were based off of a pattern. I made them to wear with the pink coat that I made. So I actually finished those, though it took a very long time since that pattern was incredibly stubborn. I also wanted to make a 1950s blouse for the Sewing Through the Decades series, and I did not accomplish that, but I am going to be showing you the pattern and the fabric today because it is something that I want to get done in the next month. I also want to make a 1930s spooky ensemble consisting of a skirt and a blouse. You may have seen in a video I will link up there. That didn't go over too well. I did finish the blouse and I really liked the blouse, but the skirt was kind of a disaster and I did not end up finishing it. I also want to finish a 1930s jacket and skirt set, and the jacket is pretty much done, but I have not made any progress on the skirt. That's something I would like to do this month, and I will probably put it on my list, but I don't know if it's actually going to happen. It just kind of depends how enthusiastic I'm feeling. I want to make the 1880s blue, which did not happen. I talked a little bit about that as a bustle dress, and I'm still really keen on the idea, but I think I'm going to move it to early next year because the colors and the blue tones would actually look really nice with a snowy, wintry backdrop. So that's my plan for that. And then it also says 1880s pumpkin, which is the orange and black bustle dress that I want to make. And I'm happy to say that I did accomplish that, and I'm quite proud of how that turned out, even though there were a few issues with the fit. I also wanted to make the Outlander bodice and skirt because I was paid to make the Outlander bodice and skirt, and I did manage to accomplish that, and I'm pretty pleased with that as well. I want to make a 1920s coat, and that is the coat that was featured in my One Coat for 5 Decades video. I really like how that turned out, and I'm really proud of that video just in general, so if you haven't seen it, then I will link it somewhere. It was a sponsored video, but I worked really hard on it, and I think it's quite a neat concept, and it's what's inspired Coatmas, which is what I'm going to be talking a lot about today. It also says 1918 suit and 1910 suit, and I didn't actually start on either of these in October. I think I'm going to push the World War I inspired suit back a little bit and maybe work on that at the beginning of the year because I want to do a little series of videos all about building a World War I style wardrobe. So that has been pushed back, and I've actually started on the 1910 suit. It is out of frame, but I have the skirt completely done, and I'm hoping to get started on the jacket today, actually. Maybe that'd be cool. It's a miracle how quickly that skirt came together, and I'm not 100% happy with it, but I'm just happy to be sewing again and making historical stuff. So I really enjoyed working on that. And then it says 18th century ensemble. And if you've seen my last weekly vlog, you'll know that this project did not end up turning out. I started on the jacket and I just had to throw it out because the fit was so terrible, and now I'm holding off on using those fabrics because I want to do something really special with them. So I'm waiting until I have the time to devote to primarily hand sewing an 18th century costume and also the money to devote to getting a nicer material to make a replacement jacket out of. Lastly, it says 1890s evening, and I actually had a kind of sort of plan to make another pumpkin project this year and use this orange taffeta with flock detailing on it, which I've had in my stash for ages. I can actually go and get it. Wouldn't this just make the perfect project for a pumpkin patch? It's got these really large scale flowers on it, and it reminds me a lot of the custom made material that was used for some Worth evening gowns. So I thought I could make a dress with a really similar silhouette to that, and it would be a very fun, relatively easy project since there wouldn't be too much hand sewing required. But I just didn't end up having time, and we actually had really bad weather at the end of October. So the pumpkin field that we usually take photos at flooded, and I think in preparation for the flooding, they also cut down half of the pumpkin field, or over half even, and got rid of a bunch of their pumpkins. So we're filming this on the 28th of October, and they got rid of a bunch of the pumpkins. So usually all of this is pumpkin, and now it's like maybe a quarter of what's usually here. And we also had a huge storm last night and kind of just all of yesterday. So it's flooded, and this is all just like swamp ground. And then where I usually have taken photos in the past, where I'm walking between the pumpkins, that's flooded. It's all just very squishy, and I'm very happy that I'm wearing my super cheap boots today instead of any American Duchess shoes. So we're going to get some stuff from the farm stand, but there's not going to be a video focusing on this project this year because it's very difficult to film in these conditions. So I think the photos of the bustle dress turned out pretty nicely. It definitely wasn't as inspiring of a backdrop as it usually is, and after we took those photos I just wasn't motivated enough to make another dress to photograph there. So this is going to be sitting in reserve probably for another year, but that was a plan that I loosely had. I think in the newsletter for $36 patrons, I also included some swatches of cotton fabrics they want to use for 1950s dresses, and none of those ended up happening. The bustle dress just took a lot longer than I was expecting to, and there was some family stuff that prevented me from getting as much done as I wanted. But that is the state of what I want to do in October, and now I'm going to write down what I would like to, in an ideal world, get done over the next 2 months. And I'm going to be using this pile of fabric in front of me as an inspiration for making this list. Also, I really wasn't kidding about pile of fabric. This is the massive heap in question. Alright, so this is my perfect world list, and I completely realized that not all of these things are going to happen. So it's sorted into categories of Coatmas, dresses, and historical. Now if you have no idea what Coatmas is, in my video about making a pink coat, I joked about doing Coatmas, which is kind of an alternative that I made up to Vlogmas. So instead of vlogging every day up until Christmas, I'd be making coats every day up until Christmas. So it probably wouldn't be a video every day because that is a lot of work, too much work for me. I thought I could potentially make like 4 coats leading up till Christmas. But me, ever being the overachiever, has a lot more than 4 ideas. So I'd really like to make a 1940s coat, a 1930s coat, a 1950s coat, and a coat based off of a 1920s pattern. And I can actually show you that pattern right now. So this is a vintage McCall's pattern, and when I saw this I thought it was quite hideous, but then I realized that it also comes with a hideous hat. And once I realized that, I really wanted to make this. And I found a burnout velvet that I think is going to be perfect for it. So I ordered a couple of yards of that, and I'm hoping that this wouldn't be too difficult to put together. There aren't very many pieces to this pattern, which makes me think it should be quite easy. So that's something that I'd like to do for Coatmas, in addition to the more normal mid-century designs. And then the 1930s coat would be a replica from a fashion plate, and the 1940s one would really be the only original design. But on top of that, I also kind of want to make an 18th century coat out of a pink wool that I've had for ages, as well as an 1860s ensemble that would have a navy coat, and potentially something Elizabethan. So now we've gone from 4 coats, which might be vaguely doable, to 7 coats, which I think is less doable, on top of a tea gown, which is kind of like a coat cape sort of thing, which I want to make for my Christmas costume this year. Now for dresses, so these are just original design dresses. I really want to make a 1930s dress out of this beautiful green wool I have, and I'd really like to use this very interesting panel of fabric that I purchased from fabric.com for a dress. I'd also like to make a 1940s dress out of the brown fabric from the Kay Facet collection, which I showed in a recent video. On top of that, I have some patterns I want to follow. So I'm actually going to show these to you right now because I don't really have to design for these since I have them right here. So this is the first pattern, and I don't know if I showed this in my previous video or not, but I'd really like to follow this at least once. I've got this Platitudes Collection fabric, which has these caramel tones in it, and some orange tones and some green tones, as well as white and black, and I think this would make a really versatile skirt within my wardrobe. Next up is this pattern. So I purchased this while I was in Lancaster, but this is a McCall's printed pattern for the 1940s, and it's got really interesting pleating across the shoulder. I think this would make a lovely dress, and to make it more appropriate for the winter season, that might be quite fun to make it out of a velveteen. So I have this really pretty soft pink velveteen, which actually perfectly matches a pair of shoes that I have, which are based on designs from the 1940s. So I thought it'd be nice to make a dress that goes with them, and I thought this would be a perfect pattern to do it out of. Next up is the 1950s blouse pattern, and I put up a poll on Patreon for this, and everyone voted for the C variation. So that's actually something that I'm going to get started on today. I want to get the mock-up done so I can get the blouse assembled soon as well. This is something that I really dragged my feet on, and I'm not sure why. But yeah, I need to get it sewn up, and I need to get it sewn up pretty quickly because I want to have this video up soon. So that is going to be a project coming up for sure. Another project that is definitely happening is this 1940s bonus project. I promised this to my patrons a long time ago, and then I just didn't follow through with it, but I still want to follow through with it. And I'm going to use this really cool rayon fabric that I have for it. It is covered with Pegasus, and I think it's going to be a really fun print for this project. But I'm kind of terrified of using this because the last time I used a rayon from Fabric Mart was for my 1930s orange dress, which just worked horribly. But let's hope this is from a different manufacturer and I won't have that issue. Another pattern is this advanced one, which I planned on making as a bonus project for the 1950s. I was really interested in this pattern because it's got very wide pin tucks, but they're about 1 inch wide, so I'm not sure if they can really be called pin tucks at that point, that run across the shoulders as well as the hips. I think it's quite flattering and interesting. I definitely haven't seen it on any other patterns from this period. Anyway, the reason I haven't followed this isn't because I don't love this pattern, because I really love the design of it. It's because I have no idea what fabric to use for it. I really gravitate towards printed fabrics with 1950s projects, but I think a lot of them would look quite weird when they're pin tucked, since I tend to gravitate towards larger, bolder prints. And I also don't feel like I have a fabric in my stash that is opaque enough and flowy enough to pull this off out of an unprinted material. Or a plain material, I guess. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with this pattern, but I would like to follow it and do a vlog about it as a bonus project for the 1950s. Now, another pattern I wanted to follow this month is the Vogue evening gown pattern, which you guys originally voted on. And I have had a lot of trouble with finding a fabric to use to follow that pattern. The first fabric that I purchased I loved, but it ended up having a whole bunch of damage to it, which made it impossible to use. So I finally came across a fabric that I thought I liked as much, and I ordered it from Fabric Mart, and I don't like it nearly as much in person. In the photos it looked like a much more vibrant pink, but here it's just kind of a dark fleshy tone, and I don't think it's going to be particularly flattering on me. And I'm really disappointed because my line of thought with this was that the blushy tone could make it look almost like a wedding dress, which I thought would be neat since it could potentially be a bridal pattern. And I also thought this would photograph really nicely in front of my pink and ivory backdrop. So even though it's not as bold as the original red fabric that I purchased, I thought it could be a good alternative. But as I said, in person, it is just not that attractive of a color. I think it would be okay for a historical project where it has a lot of gathers and trim and, I don't know, just details that add more texture, but for a relatively simple ball gown, I'm not sure if it's right. So that covers all of these projects, as well as this project and this project, and now I'm going to go ahead and sketch out some of the other ideas that I have. So as I said, this isn't as planned as it was last month, so I'm going to bring my computer over, and there's probably going to be less satisfying speeded up footage, but I will show you what I'm working on and what ideas that I have. So here is my first idea for coatness, and this is the one that's more of an original design. And it would be based off of coats from the 1940s. So it would have fairly wide cut shoulders, very kind of menswear inspired. And then it'd be really nipped in at the waist. I don't currently have a coat that really nips in at the waist, so the thought of this excites me. It actually wouldn't have a belt. Instead, it will be shaped with this kind of interesting front piece, which I've seen done on fashion plates from this period. And then I think for this one, I'd just do kind of your classic 1930s collar. And I haven't patterned this yet, so I'm not entirely sure, but I imagine there needs to be a dart of some sort in there, or gathers or something to provide the shaping. And then the sleeves would just be your typical kind of lightly puffed 1940s sleeves. It won't be super wide cut because coats were pretty straight cut in the 40s. They'll have a little bit of a flare. And then I'm going to do these side panels, which kind of run parallel to the seaming detail here. So that's my idea for that, and then I would probably mirror this detailing on the back. I haven't actually thought that much about the back of this coat. I don't know, I need to play around with the idea of the back more, but this is definitely the 1940s coat plan that I wanted to go with. And my only issue with this is I don't know what fabric to use. So I purchased this brown fabric, and it's got this mottled effect to it, which I feel like almost makes it look linty, but it also adds a lot of texture to it, and I think it's kind of appropriate for the World War II era that this coat would have been made in. It's a really nice weight of coating. It's a wool melton, so it feels almost like a felt, but with more texture because it's a wool blend. So I really like the fabric. I just don't know if I love the treatment of the top layer of it, but I'm leaning towards keeping it because it was in my price range, and I do want to make this coat out of brown fabric. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find anything better. This next idea is actually totally stolen from a magazine, so I'm not even going to bother sketching it out. I'm just going to show an image of it on screen. So this, I just think is absolutely beautiful. It's so elegant and interesting in the way it's pieced, and I would really love to try and replicate it. Now, I originally wanted to replicate this even down to the color, so I ended up purchasing this boiled wool from Fabric Mart. I think the color is spot on, but I think the original coat was made out of a much thinner material, which is why it's pictured almost having a sort of sheen to it, like it's made out of silk or taffeta. It does have a lot of lapped seam detailing, which is why I gravitated towards a heavier weight wool, and I also, again, just adored the color of this. But I'm not sure if it's super appropriate for this project, which makes me really sad. So I'm wondering if I should use this fabric instead, which I purchased to make a 1950s coat out of. And I feel like it would work pretty well for a 1950s coat, but it's also a thinner, denser weave that might be more appropriate for this 1930s design. But I feel like the prominent weave in it, even though that's what originally drew me to it, kind of makes it inappropriate for this project. The more I think about it, the more I think this should be made out of silk. But I really don't want to try and do those lapped seam detailings out of silk. So do you see the problem here? I just held the pink fabric up to me, and the weave actually isn't as obvious from a distance. So I think I'm going to use the pink fabric for this, and then it won't be a perfect replica down to the type and color of material, but I will try and follow the pattern relatively closely. And then I can use the thicker blue wool for the 1950s style coat, which is from a pattern, and I think that sorts everything out, which is awesome because that means that I don't have to order more fabric or actually return fabric or anything like that. So for this, I actually show a flat lay of what the pattern looks like, and I'm planning on kind of making that larger and trying to copy that and see how it works for me and then go from there, as opposed to trying to drape my own variant of this. So I'm not sure why I'm even sketching it. I should probably just be showing you what it looks like on screen and kind of tell you that that is my plan for the 1930s project from Coatmas. Now for the 1860s ensemble, here are my sketches. I've already made them because I've already started on this project. I've actually already draped and drafted and made a mock-up for the coat, and I've completed, or almost completed I guess, the blouse, and I've got a plan for the skirt. In case it isn't immediately clear what these plans are for, it's for an 1860s uniform that a woman would have worn as a vivandière or a cantonnière. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but these were basically women who went to the front lines of war and often went with a family member, specifically their husband. And I'm under the impression that they had light nursing duties and also sold beverage and food goods to the men. And they often wore uniforms that were kind of feminized versions of what the men were wearing. I think at one point I asked on Instagram for ideas and people mentioned these in the comments, and I looked them up and I just instantly became fascinated because the fashion plates of them, they almost look comical, just these women wearing these brightly colored pants underneath knee-length skirts and the iconic Civil War era uniforms. It just fascinates me and I've wanted to make one for a really long time. So I recently found this wool on fabric.com, and it's this dark navy wool, and it was $10 a yard, and it is the most beautiful wool melton I've ever felt. I have no idea how this is so cheap, but I am so pleased with it. And I purchased 5 yards, intending to make myself a coat out of it. But the more I thought about Coatmas, the more I realized I didn't want to just be doing mid-century designs. I wanted to cast the net a little bit farther, and it seemed like the perfect time to make one of these. So the coat for this is hopefully going to be part of Coatmas, and then I'm planning on making everything else this week, or at least that is what I intend on doing. So that is that idea, and I'm not going to be sketching that either, but on top of this jacket and the skirt, it's also going to be paired with a pair of pants. And I'm thinking I can actually use a 1940s pants pattern for it, and then just taper it off close to the leg. And I'm sure I have a lighter weight navy fabric in the basement somewhere that I can use for those pants. And then I'm actually going to use remnants of a bright red fabric I used for a Mountie uniform for stripes down the sides of the pants. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a great way to bust some things for my stash and also make something that I've been really inspired by for a long time. So now let's talk a little bit about the Elizabethan jacket. Now I want to make something Elizabethan for a long time, and I feel like when you're getting into a period you're less familiar with, it can sometimes be nice to start with some of the more casual pieces or costumes, because then you're still going to learn a lot about how to piece those garments, but you're not going to be piling as much trim on top of them, potentially wasting time and money on something that doesn't quite have the right silhouette or fit, just because you're not super familiar with what you're making. So for a long time, I've wanted to make a very elaborate Elizabethan court gown, but I've known that I want to start with something a little bit simpler. And I've had a couple attempts and they've kind of failed, but when I saw this fabric, I thought it was time for another attempt. So this is from Fabric Mart, and it is a, I think, silk and wool blend, and it is a suiting with this yellowy toned base and then these vibrant black floral patterns on it. And this floral embroidered pattern reminded me a lot of the embroidered Elizabethan jackets. It's not going to be perfect, but it did seem reminiscent of that to me. And I knew I had enough black fabric in my stash that I could easily make a black skirt to go with this and have kind of a two-piece waistcoat or doublet and skirt set. For buying this and doing some Googling, I realized that unmatched skirt sets weren't very common. So usually you would have a matching embroidered skirt to go with the jacket, but there are a few paintings that show contrasting skirts. So I think it's possible, even if it wasn't common. I know they actually recently made a replica of an embroidered Elizabethan jacket, and I think it took something like 4,000 hours of work and 250 people. I might have those numbers slightly off, but it took a ridiculous amount of time. So I don't think a fully hand-embroidered Elizabethan jacket is ever in my future, and that's why I really like it when I find fabrics like this, which might be kind of passable, or at least have a similar feel to them, even if they don't have the perfect look. Also, I feel like that project that took so many hours is really cool, but I feel like no matter what you do, you're never going to have something be perfectly historically accurate. So I think, especially for hobbyist level, you should kind of do what's fun to you and what you enjoy, and maybe not worry as much about whether or not it's perfectly historically accurate. And I think these jackets were just made out of 3 or 4 pieces, and then these skirts were given volume with gores that are inserted into slits. So that's how it has enough volume to flare out over the petticoats. And I do have the patterns of fashion books, which I know go into a little bit more detail about this, so I'm definitely going to read up on those before I draft this or anything, but this is just getting the rough idea down. And then I don't know if I want to make it... I'm not 100% sure about the sleeves just yet. This is definitely one of those things that I need to research more. And I don't think I'm actually going to sketch out the 18th century coat. I literally haven't done any sketching in this video so far. And it's honestly kind of a project I forgot about until I was cleaning up today. I have this 18th century dress that I made probably at least a year ago, and I purchased this fabric at the same time with hopes to make a jacket to go over it, which isn't very historically accurate, but I was watching Poldark at the time and thought that would be fun. So I haven't done a lot of research in over a year as to what I want to turn this into, but I do want to make it into a jacket, and I think this project would photograph well against the backdrop of changing leaves, so that might be something that I decide to do, but we'll see. Another idea that is kind of highly dependent on the weather is one involving this, and I honestly don't think I'm going to have time to do this before the leaves change, which kills me a little bit, but I really want to turn this fabric into a suit. So it's actually very similar in weight to the embroidered fabric. It is a wool silk blend, and I really want to turn it into a Victorian suit. I've had this idea in my head for a while. I've just been waiting for a fabric that inspired me enough to do it, and this is the fabric. But I think my dad's going to be traveling for this whole month pretty much, and he's usually my resident photographer, so I don't think this is going to be able to happen, which is, you know, truly devastating, but I will show you the idea of it. So what it would be is it would be kind of relatively fitted over the hip suit, and then the bottom is completely gathered. So it's made out of these kind of pieces cut almost like a circle skirt. And it might not be that voluminous and dramatic just because I only have, I think, 5 yards of this fabric, but it would be close. And then the skirt would be decorated with bands of velvet. So it looked like that. And I've actually tried to make a skirt similar to this before. I just didn't invest nearly enough time into the planning and mock-up making process, and it was like over before it even started. It was such a disaster. But I recently purchased a whole bunch of muslin, and I'd definitely been willing to sacrifice quite a bit of it to make sure that I could make this the way that I'm imagining. So as I said, I really just want to make this because the leaves are the right color right now, and I don't know if I'm going to have time to make it before they change, but I love this idea so much. And then the jacket, I actually haven't thought that much about the jacket, but it'd be made with pretty fitted sleeves, I'd reckon. And there's a fashion plate very similar to this. Like, I'm not claiming that this is the totally original design, but I don't have the fashion plate in front of me. And what if I did the same design in velvet on the back? So yeah, that's my idea for that, and that's really only the second sketch I've done this video so far, which is supposed to be about sketching, and I deeply apologize. So the next thing I would really like to make this year, and have be my Christmas costume this year, is a tea gown. So tea gowns were kind of an entertaining gown that you wouldn't wear out of your house, but you'd wear in front of people. And they almost looked like very elaborate lingerie. Some of them are made out of silk and charmeuse, and they're basically just robes, whereas others are very structured and made out of taffetas or stiffer fabrics. Now, I'd kind of like to make a super inaccurate version of these, and have that be my Christmas project this year. And I was playing around with the idea of making a dress to go underneath it, but I don't know that I even need to have to. That's not English. I don't know that I even need to. So I wanted to have kind of this type of neckline, since I think that's really interesting. And I want to have a lot of ruffles. So I'm thinking that I can basically go to here, and then it could kind of start flaring out. And I'm thinking that I could have something that gathers it right there, like a drawstring, to make it more flattering. And I'd like for trimming it to have like these little lace ruffles all the way down the front, and then have a band of ruffles, or have a band, and then have a band of flat fabric, and then have another potentially even wider ruffle. I'm gonna have to look up lace on Etsy for this and kind of design around that, but I'm thinking that could be the front. Now, my issue with this is that I really want to make it out of velvet, because even though I hate velvet, I think it makes the most dramatic capes and robes and such. But I can't find any examples that were made out of velvet. They seem to be very lightweight, airy garments, kind of built for comfort and made out of lighter weight silks. But I'm really not envisioning something made out of a lighter weight silk, so I'm not really sure what to do with myself. I have this pink kind of fishy tone velvet, which I think would be really nice for it, already in my stash, which is also motivating that decision. And if I make it out of velvet, then I don't have to make a dress to go underneath it, but I'm still kind of conflicted. So I'm thinking, actually, I kind of sketched this wrong, but I wanted it to kind of go up the neck, so then at the back, it can be high neck. And then the ruffles would just continue, obviously. And then I want it to be almost like an 18th century sack back gown. So with like pleats over the shoulder that provide it with volume. And I'll link a couple references down below if you've never seen any garments like this before. And then it could have like a waist to cinch it in, or a tie at the waist to cinch it in. So that's what I'm thinking for Christmas this year. It's very different than anything I've done before, but I really like the idea of it. Kind of like a frilly nightgown you can wear in front of people. Who doesn't want that? Also on my list for potential historical projects are an 18th century gown, but I don't think that's going to end up happening. And then the only other thing that I haven't really covered is the panel dress that I was hoping to make. So I got this really cool panel from Fabric.com, and it's almost got a window pane effect. And I'm going to try and place this around my chest and then have darts that taper it in. I purchased another matching fabric from the range, as well as this twill fabric that matches quite nicely. So that's another idea that I have in my head. And then I still have, as I said earlier, this K-facet fabric that I'd love to turn into a 1940s dress. So that's kind of where all of my ideas are right now, and I'm sorry if this video is all over the place, but I know it's very, very long, so I think I'm just going to end it here. But I am sorry that there wasn't more sketching in this. That's part of the issue when I haven't planned these out, is that I'm still kind of gathering references and not quite ready to put things onto paper. But I hope it was enjoyable, and thank you so much for watching and for the support, and I will talk to all of you very soon.